Story time about the toxic boy that I almost started dating. So a little background information. Him and I both met on a set of a movie that we were in. Well, a few days into filming, he asked me out. So of course I said yes. And it was literally the most amazing first date ever. So he asked for a second date and I said yes, of course. And the second date was terrible. He literally just tried to get in my pants the whole time. So then he asked me for a third date. And for some reason I said yes, hoping that it was not anything like the second date. And he didn't show up. So I pretty much got stood up. And then he even blocked my number. So a few months go by and I end up moving in with my best friend. About an hour away from where I was living when I met him. Well, the one night she came home and told me that he had messaged her on Instagram, which I thought was funny as hell because my best friend did not swing that way. So she pretends to flirt with him and asks him to come over. So he drives an hour to our apartment and when he walks in, he just sees me standing in the kitchen. He immediately walked out. Story time about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know it. So a little background information. When I was 15, my house burnt down and I went into a little bit of a depression. So after losing everything, my 6 siblings and I had to move into a 3-bedroom place with my grandparents. And a month or so later, I was looking for friends. Someone to talk to or pretty much anything that would just make me feel better. Well, this guy messaged me and he said, "You're pretty as shit." And I'm 15, so a bitch was excited. Well, 2 weeks later, I asked my mom if I could go over my friend Samantha's. And of course she said yes. Because I had stayed with Samantha a lot during this time. Also because there was barely room for any of us in this 3-bedroom house. So a little background information on my parents. My mom had been a police officer for 12 years. Sadly, she had to retire because of a neck surgery. My ex-stepdad was and still is a police officer today. Anyway, so my mom asked for pictures whenever I went over Samantha's to make sure I was really there. Like for part 2. Story time about how I was groomed for almost 2 years and didn't even know. So like I said, my mom used to ask for pictures to make sure that I was really at Samantha's house. Well, Samantha lived about 10 minutes away from the guy that I was talking to. Every time that I went to her house, I would leave at about 8 p.m. and go over to his house. And he was 26 years old. And obviously I knew my parents would freak the fuck out if they found out. And we had planned to keep this a secret until I turned 18. So that way my parents couldn't tell me that I wasn't allowed to be with him. So flash forward to about 3 days before I turned 18. My mom comes into my work. She walks up to me, shows me a picture of him, and says, "Who the hell is this?" So of course I say I have no idea who the hell she's talking about. She said okay and then left. Well, as soon as I got home, her and my dad were sitting in the living room, waiting for me to explain who that man was. So I told them everything. They decided not to take legal action, but my mom explained to me that I was so young and he took advantage of me and stuff like that, so I never saw him again. Story time about why I beat up my best friend. So a little background information. Her and I had been best friends since we were in 7th grade. Her family was rich, mine was poor, and at first she was a really good friend. She was always there for me whenever I needed her, until our freshman year of high school, which is when her and I started hanging out with boys. Now, my mom was kind of strict. She wouldn't really let me hang out with boys, but her mom was more lenient about her hanging out with boys. Every weekend, she would throw a party at her house, and she would throw them in her attic because 1, it was huge, and 2, her parents didn't give a fuck what she did up there. Anyways, she would always offer to do my hair and makeup before the party started, which always made me really excited because I never really put any work into my physical appearance. Well, little did I know, the only reason why she would offer to do my hair and makeup at these parties was so that way she could make me look like shit in front of all the boys. So after that, I taught myself how to do my own makeup and do my own hair, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I beat up my best friend. So like I said, I learned how to do my hair and makeup, and she went on vacation for like a month straight. Well, when she came home, she threw another party, and she was like, "Don't worry, after I'm done getting ready, I'll do your makeup and do your hair." And I was like, "No, it's fine, I got it." She literally looks at me and she goes, "Are you sure? You don't really know how to do that. Like, it'll probably look really bad." And I'm like, "Why the fuck would you say that?" She goes, "No, like, I don't mean it to be rude. It's just that, like, I want you to look good in front of the boys and stuff like that." Like, sis tried to talk me into getting a shower for a full, like, 20 minutes. So after that, the whole night, she's literally being a pick-me girl. She's making all these comments about me in front of the boys, and I just keep brushing them off until her next party. We got ready, and I put on these expensive shoes that I had just bought, and she goes, "Wow, you just, like, really like to copy my style, don't you?" So she starts making comments that whole night about how my family's poor and stuff like that, and she threw up all over my shoes. So I dumped the trash can that everybody had threw up in that night on her, punched her in the face, but like 2 months later, she came to my house and apologized. Story time about how I was dating the school shooter. Yeah. So a little background information. I was a sophomore whenever this all happened, and it was around October. Well, the one day I was sitting at lunch with my group of friends. We're all sitting there having a good time when one of my friends dares me to go over and sit with this one kid. And he was sitting alone, he was kind of shy. And of course I did because they had offered me $10, guys. Can't beat that. So I go over there, we start talking, and I realize that he's actually really nice. And he's really hot. I never really saw what he looked like because he was always wearing hoodies during school. Anyways, we started hanging out more, and eventually he said that he liked me and we started dating. The relationship seemed pretty perfect. Well, 6 months in, I think he started to trust me more, because he had told me about this one group of girls that he absolutely hated. This group of girls just happened to be my friends. I didn't tell him that I was friends with these girls because they were considered controversial. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I was dating the school shooter. Like I said, I had never told him that I was friends with these girls because they were controversial, but he would go on for hours about how much he hated these girls. He went as far to say that he wanted to kill them. I didn't think anything of it at first, because him and I had more of a sarcastic sense of humor, but he started to sound more and more serious every time that he would talk about it. Well, after us dating for 10 months, he calls me the one night, and he starts telling me about how he's going to shoot up the school. He had told me his entire plan of how he was going to do this. Now, he must have thought that we were like ride or die relationship, when in reality, I was recording everything that he was saying. After we got off the phone, I wrote an email to all of the office staff in my school, but I fell asleep and never finished the email. I woke up the next morning, finished it. I had texted my friends not to go to school that day. I had already missed the bus. I rode my bike to school that day. I ran to the principal's office, nobody was there, and that's whenever I heard shots in the hallway.
Story time, my best friend cheated on his girlfriend with me. So a little background information. So Gavin and I had been best friends ever since we were little. We lived in the same neighborhood, and my parents and his grandparents were like pretty close, I guess. But like everybody in our neighborhood was close with each other. And I always had a huge crush on him. And I would try to like subtly tell him that I liked him. But he would always be like, ew, don't joke with me like that. Like, that's not true. And eventually, I just kind of got the hint that that was his way of telling me, I don't like you. Stop before I tell you, in a mean way. So when we were in middle school, he was always having these like 2-day relationships with all these girls and everything. And me, not so much, because sis didn't have a glow up until she reached like her sophomore year in high school. And the thing was, I wasn't that best friend who would be like, ew, don't date her, like she's ugly or anything like that. Like, I would totally respect all of his relationships, even if they were 2 days long, but he would literally still block me. Well, the one day we were hanging out at his house, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my best friend cheated on his girlfriend with me. So like I said, the one night I was at his house and he was on my phone and he was asking me who all these guys were on my Snapchat. And I told him that I had been talking to them and he was just being super toxic. He was talking shit on every single one of them. So eventually I started dating this guy, Trey, and after that he texted me saying that I was gross and everything else, when the next day he literally got a girlfriend. But weirdly enough, he didn't block me that time. He actually started texting me more, saying how him and his girlfriend were so happy together, da-da-da-da-da. And unlike him, I would be supportive. Well, the one night at 2 a.m., he came over my house and he was like, I don't have feelings for my girlfriend. And I'm like, okay, then why are you with her? And then he has the nerve to say, don't you get that I like you? Like, really? Well, eventually we cut off all communication and he was still with this girl. Well, the one night he asked me to come over and talk, and we ended up doing the nasty. And then he blocked me on everything after he said we should both leave our girlfriends and boyfriends. Well, I ended up telling his girlfriend what we did, and they also come to my family cookouts.
Story time about the girl who tried to talk me into doing the nasty with her dad. Literally. So a little background information. 2 months before this whole situation, I had met her through one of my friends at a party. She was really funny, really nice. We're gonna call this girl Jessie. So when my friend and I left the party, I had asked her about Jessie, and she was like, oh, I wouldn't really hang around her. She's just like a really weird person. Now, I didn't really take my friend's word for it, mainly because in the past, my friend has gotten really jealous whenever I've started hanging out with other people. So I decided to find out for myself, which now I realize that was probably not one of my best ideas. So a few weeks later, we hung out with her again, and I got her number that night. Her and I started hanging out a lot. And her and I were both seniors in high school. Well, when I would go over to her house, her dad would be super weird around me. He would just be very overly nice and touchy with me. And her mom and her dad were divorced. Well, the one night I'm sitting in Jessie's room and she comes upstairs and she's like, OMG, I have to tell you what my dad said. Like for part 2. Okay, part 2 about the girl who tried to talk me into doing the nasty with her dad. Literally. Like I said, she comes upstairs to her bedroom and she's like, OMG, I have to tell you what my dad just said about you. And she would literally do this all the time. She would be like, oh, my dad just said that you're so pretty, or my dad just said that if you were his age, he would totally date you. And just like super weird things like that. Well, I was like, oh, like what did he say? And she was like, OMG, I feel so weird telling you. Like I really don't want to tell you. She was like, I feel like you'll think he's weird. Low-key, she didn't know that I already thought that he was weird. But I was like, oh, okay. She was like, okay, fine, I'll just tell you. My dad said that he would totally fuck you. And I was like, oh, that's really gross. Like, he's really fucking weird for that. And she was like, no, you should totally do it. And I was like, no, I'm good. Like, that does not make me feel comfortable. And she was like, dude, you don't understand. He'll pay you. And her dad was super rich, like he owned 4 of his own companies and everything. But still, that was not enough to bribe me to do it with this man. So I grabbed my stuff and I am like about to walk out of her room. And she's like, wait, no, don't go. Like I was just joking. And I was like, no, I'm still gonna leave. And she was like, no, please, please, please don't. Like, how are you gonna get home? I'm not driving you. So I start walking down the stairs and I stop and look into the living room and I see her dad laying naked on the couch, just watching the stairs. It's like he was literally waiting for me to come down here to do the nasty with him. So I start running out the door and her dad chases me and he's like, hey, like, where are you going? What's wrong? And I'm like covering my eyes. I turn around and I'm like, you're what's fucking wrong. You're so fucking gross. After that, she texted me begging me not to tell anybody, and I don't really see her anymore except for when we go to parties and she just happens to be there. Story time about how my boyfriend found out that I was cheating on him with his best friend. So a little background information. We're gonna call my boyfriend Tyler. Tyler and I had been dating since he was 16 and I was 13. And now it was my freshman year in high school and his senior year. And we're gonna call his best friend Jaden. Now there was one really big problem with Tyler and I's relationship. I was pretty much dating Jaden too. Now if you don't get what I mean by that, Jaden was there for literally every single thing that we did in our relationship. Anytime I would invite Tyler over, guess who was walking in right behind him? Jaden. Anytime that Tyler and I went on dates, guess who was there? Jaden. And there wouldn't even be another girl there. He would literally just third wheel on our dates. And I talked to Tyler about it before and he's like, well, I don't know what you want me to do. He's my best friend. So fast forward, the one day Tyler and Jaden are both over my house, like for part 2. Part 2 about how my boyfriend found out that I was cheating on him with his best friend. So like I said, Jaden and Tyler are both at my house. And Tyler ends up getting a call. And it was his mom telling him that his brother had just passed away. So Tyler told Jaden that he needed to find a ride home. And after that, Tyler left immediately. Now me, I do not know what the hell to do. Because Jaden and I had never been left alone before. And it wasn't really because Tyler didn't trust us. It was more of though we didn't really have a reason to be alone together. So that night he was supposed to wait for my parents to get home so that way they could drive him. But I ended up getting him an Uber because he said that he liked me and I did not know what to do. Fast forward, while my boyfriend is in the grieving stages, I was messing with his best friend behind his back. And the one day he had walked in on us doing spicy things. And after, he had his whole family posting things about me on Facebook saying that I was a whore and everything.
Story time about how I found my uncle sleeping with my best friend. So a little background information. I was 18 at the time and a freshman in college. My uncle was a National Guard, and we were the same age, we went to the same school, and we also had the same friends. And while he was away, I had made one friend that he didn't know about. Her and I became best friends, we got into the same college, and we were in the same dorm room together. Well, the one day my uncle came to my college to surprise me. I ran up to him, I gave him a big hug, and my best friend was super confused because I had never introduced them. And when I introduced them, there was this weird, awkward vibe. So all 3 of us went back to the dorm room, and I asked her if it was okay that he spent the night, because I didn't want to be that person to just invade her space. So she ended up saying yes, and eventually we all got really hungry, and we all wanted Chick-fil-A, so I went and I left them all alone in the room together, like for part 2. Part 2 about how I found my uncle sleeping with my best friend. So like I said, I went to go get us Chick-fil-A and I left them in the dorm all alone together. While I was waiting in line, I called them to ask what they wanted and nobody answered the phone. So I was like, okay, whatever, you know, it's fine. They're probably just busy talking.
talking. So I low-key took a long time because I went to the grocery store to get some cookies. I was just craving them. So then I get back to the dorm room. As soon as I open the door, I see both of them unclothed on top of each other on the bed, doing the nasty. So for some reason, I had a broom and I threw it at my uncle, and I went to my friend's apartment that night. And when I told my mom about it, she said that it was my fault because weirdly enough, they praised all the boys in my family. Story time about how he cheated on his baby mama with me. So a little background information. There was this boy, and we're going to call him John. John and I knew each other through one of our mutual friends. Well, 24/7, John would post sad quotes on his Snapchat story because him and his girlfriend had just broken up. So I decided that I was going to be Captain Save-A-Ho and be there for him, telling him it was okay and that everything happens for a reason. Well, eventually, John had developed a huge crush on me. Like, he would flirt with me 24/7, sending me all these cute emojis. And of course, my dumbass fell for it. So after talking for a little bit, him and I started dating. Well, the one day I was on Snapchat going through his story, and he was posting a bunch of funny memes on his story, and I was just laughing until I got to the last thing that he posted on his story. It was this picture of a baby girl saying, "I can't wait to meet you from Dada." So with my crazy ass, I jumped on the phone and started cussing him out. And then he goes, "What are you talking about? That's my little sister." Like for part 2. Part 2 about how he cheated on his baby mama with me. So like I said, when I confronted him about it, he said that it was a picture of his baby sister. Always with the Alabama shit. For what reason, I don't know. But he calls me the next day and he starts apologizing about everything. And then he decides to make a new Snapchat account and starts talking to me on there, thinking that I was just gonna block his other account. He posts a picture of his baby mama. So at this point, my Virgo self and I were done with the bullshit. By the way, he's a Gemini, so if that doesn't explain it, I don't know what will. So I start dating my new man, and I commented on all of his posts. I guess I'm not surprised she's not the only bitch you're fucking with. And if you try lying, I'm going to spill the tea. Like, I just think that it's really funny how females just think that their men are so loyal, even when you literally expose their man with every piece of evidence. Well, the girl who sent this in has a special message for all of us. I promise you that men ain't shit. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Story time about why you should never, ever, ever do drugs. So a little background information. In my town, on the 15th of June this year, 2 girls got kidnapped in my hometown. So I kind of knew these 2 girls. I mean, they went to my school, but that was really it. Because low-key, I didn't want to be friends with them, and I kind of hated them. They were in 7th grade, I was in 8th grade, so they were probably like a year younger than me. Anyway, so it was a Wednesday, and the last time they had been seen was at 8 p.m. with a 30-year-old man. They were supposedly doing drugs outside of a McDonald's. Well, I guess this man saw that they had been doing drugs, and he wanted some. Before that, I guess he kind of eased into the question because he was like talking to them, getting to know them, and I guess he thought he had a really good shot at getting some drugs. But when he asked, they said no. So then he asked a few more times and they finally gave them to him. But whenever they got closer, he grabbed both of them, put him in his van, and drove off. And he hid them in his house. Like for part 2. Part 2 of why you should never, ever, ever do drugs. So like I said, he asked for them again, and finally the girls decided to give him some. But when they got closer, he grabbed both of them and shoved them in his van, drove off. Well, he ended up driving to his house and decided to hide them there. Well, one of the girls' aunts posted something on Facebook saying that both of them were missing. And soon, the news made an article that literally said, "Drug addict and her friend gets kidnapped." They went missing for like 6 days, and on the 22nd of June, they were found. But now they won't stop bragging about how fun it was to get kidnapped. And that is why, still to this day, I absolutely despise these girls.